April 1945. Berlin was a graveyard of concrete and steel. As Soviet tanks moved block by block toward the city center, Adolf Hitler vanished from the public eye. He retreated 30 feet underground. The Führerbunker became the final command post of a dying empire. Inside, the air was stale. The walls vibrated from constant artillery fire. Hitler sat surrounded by a few loyal officers and staff members. Outside, the Third Reich was in a state of total military collapse. Everything following this moment is a blur of conflicting data. The record consists of fragmentary testimonies and compromised physical evidence. For decades, the story has changed. Intelligence agencies in Washington and Moscow produced thousands of pages of reports. Forensic experts analyzed bone fragments and teeth. Governments offered contradictory explanations. Some claimed suicide, others claimed a secret cremation. The fate of the remains stayed hidden in classified archives. Was it a suicide or a disappearance? The dental evidence was questioned. Soviet documents were hidden for years. Rumors of escape routes to South America or Antarctica surfaced. No single version closed the case. Was it a massive cover-up operation? Did the most wanted man in history die in a hole? Or did he slip through the front lines to avoid justice? The official version begins with a wedding. April 29, 1945. Soviet shells were hitting the Chancellery Gardens above. Inside the bunker, Hitler married Eva Braun in a brief civil ceremony. The documents were signed, a few drinks were shared, but there was no celebration. 24 hours later, the situation changed. Both were dead. The witnesses described the aftermath in dry, terrifying detail. Heinz Linger, Hitler's personal valet, was the first to act. He opened the door to the study. The smell of burnt almonds filled the room. This was the scent of cyanide. Linger reported what he saw: 2 bodies on a small sofa. The scene was static. Hitler sat on the right. A bullet hole was visible in his right temple. Blood dripped onto the carpet. Eva Braun sat to his left. There were no visible wounds on her body. A small glass vial lay on the floor. The valet did not hesitate. He called for help to move the corpses. This was the start of the mystery. April 30th, 1945. Adolf Hitler sat on a sofa with a bullet hole in his right temple. Next to him lay Eva Braun. She had no visible wounds. Instead, the room smelled of bitter almonds, the distinct scent of cyanide. Why did the witnesses disagree? At first glance, the story was clear, but in reality, the details were shifting. Otto Günscher was Hitler's personal adjutant. He gave specific details about the scene. Heinz Linger, the valet, gave a different version. Their accounts of the room did not match. Rokas Misch, the switchboard operator, reported sounds and smells that contradicted both of them. These men were the inner circle. Yet, their stories were full of cracks. The footage from the bunker shows narrow, dark corridors. The air was thick with the smell of diesel and sweat. In the frame, the witnesses look exhausted. It was a signal to the world. Hitler had given one final order. His remains must be destroyed. He had seen what happened to Benito Mussolini. The Italian partisans had hung Mussolini's body upside down in a public square. Hitler refused to become a trophy. Linger and Günscher claimed they carried the bodies to the Chancellery Garden. They placed them in a bomb crater. They poured gasoline over the corpses and struck a match. But this was only the beginning of the mystery. The men claimed the fire burned for 3 hours, all while Soviet shells fell on Berlin. One detail remains problematic: the fuel. In April 1945, Berlin was a graveyard. Gasoline was more valuable than gold. It was almost impossible to find. There was no mistake in the physics. Forensic experts have analyzed the site. An open-air fire cannot erase a human body. To reduce bone to ash, you need a specialized furnace. It requires a constant temperature of 1,000 degrees Celsius for several hours. A pit in a garden is not a crematorium. The sound of heavy artillery echoes through the reports. The ground was shaking. Why would the witnesses lie? Every key individual was captured by SMERSH. This was the Soviet counterintelligence unit. They were famous for brutal interrogation methods. They didn't just ask questions, they broke people. The timing was also suspicious. These testimonies were not recorded on the day of the suicide. They were taken months or years later. The men were sitting in Soviet prison cells. Something was wrong with their memories. Usually, when people witness a traumatic event, their stories differ. They forget details. They mix up the sequence. But these witnesses were different. The accounts were almost perfect. They described the same movements, the same words, and the same timing. It was as if they were reading from a script. The story cut off here. April 30th, 1945. The events inside the bunker followed a rigid sequence. The marriage, the final will, the double suicide involving cyanide and a Walther pistol. Finally, the cremation in the garden. Everything was synchronized. To some, the timing seemed too perfect to be spontaneous. The Soviets made their claim quickly. They announced they found dental remains in a shell crater. This was their proof of Hitler's identity. 2 witnesses were brought in, Kata Huysman and Fritz Echtmann. Both were assistants to Hitler's personal dentist. They looked at the dental bridges. They confirmed the remains belonged to the Führer. But a physical anomaly existed. The dental bridges were found separated from the jawbone. This is not typical. In a standard cremation, even an incomplete one, teeth remain attached to the bone. The separation suggests manual interference. It looks as if someone deliberately placed the bridges there to be found as evidence. The interrogation process was intense. Huysman and Echtmann were held in separate rooms. They had no access to original dental records. Yet, their descriptions matched perfectly. Both had worked on Hitler's teeth for years. They knew every bridge and crown. But they also knew the stakes. Their lives depended on satisfying Soviet investigators. Under such pressure, the power of suggestion is absolute. 2017. Philippe Charlier, a French forensic expert, entered the debate. He announced he had confirmed the teeth belonged to Hitler. His study appeared in a European medical journal. It was marketed as the final word on the case. The methodology had limitations. Charlier worked only with photographs. He used fragments provided by Russian authorities. There was no independent access to the remains. No DNA tests were performed on the dental fragments. The analysis relied on morphological comparisons with X-rays from 1944. The coincidences were impressive, but there was a problem. If an organization wanted to fake the evidence, they had the tools. They possessed the same 1944 X-rays. Dental technology in the 1940s was advanced. Replicating a specific bridge was possible with the right molds and references. The biggest blow to the official story came in 2009. Scientists performed a DNA analysis on a skull fragment. For decades, the Soviet archives claimed this skull belonged to Hitler. The results were shocking. The DNA belonged to a woman. She was between 20 and 40 years old. This discovery destroyed a pillar of Soviet forensic history. It raised a critical question. If the Soviets were wrong about the skull, what else was false? Other evidence could be misidentified, or it could be a deliberate forgery. The Soviet cover-up was beginning to crack. Events accelerated. Doubt replaced certainty. Confidence in the official narrative vanished. May 1945. The world believed the war was over. But in the Kremlin, a different story was being written. Joseph Stalin possessed information that the Western Allies completely ignored. 9 days passed after the reported suicide in the bunker. While London and Washington celebrated, Stalin spoke privately with Harry Hopkins. Hopkins was the personal envoy of President Truman. Stalin told him directly, Hitler did not die. He is hiding. This was not the delusion of a paranoid man. It was a calculated move. Stalin had access to intelligence reports that no one else could see. June 9, 1945. Marshal Georgy Zhukov held a massive press conference. He announced to the global media that Hitler's corpse had not been found. He stated the Soviet Union could not confirm the death. Why did the Soviets lie? Only weeks earlier, their own specialists had identified dental remains in the rubble of Berlin. The contradictions were intentional. They were part of a massive disinformation operation orchestrated by the Kremlin. The strategy was purely Machiavellian. The footage from that era shows the tension. Soviet officers move through the ruins of the chancellery. They collect files and burn crates. Behind closed doors, they held the physical evidence. Publicly, they fed the flames of conspiracy. At the Potsdam Conference, the tension peaked. Stalin looked Truman in the eyes. He claimed Hitler had likely escaped to Spain or South America. Argentina was the specific destination mentioned. These statements were recorded in the official transcripts. At first glance, a search for truth, but in reality, a geopolitical trap. Stalin wanted the West to remain on edge. He wanted the world to fear a ghost. By keeping the death unconfirmed, he maintained a psychological weapon against his rivals. Every report of a sighting in the mountains or a submarine in the Atlantic served Soviet interests. There was no mistake. The Soviets knew the truth, but the myth of the fugitive was more useful than a dead body. The operation was a success. The world started looking for a man who no longer existed. Thus began the greatest mystery of the 20th century. May 1945. The Soviet Union controlled the ruins of Berlin. They also controlled the story of Hitler's end. Stalin deliberately fed contradictory reports to the global press. One day, the dictator was dead. The next, he had fled to Argentina or Spain. These were the first seeds of escape theories that would persist for decades. Why did Stalin create this confusion? It was a calculated strategic move. A living Hitler myth served Moscow's interests. First, it justified a massive Soviet military presence in East Germany. If the Nazi leader was still at large, he remained a permanent threat. This required constant vigilance and more troops. Second, it was a weapon against the West. Stalin suggested that the Americans and British were hiding Nazi fugitives. It was a tool to delegitimize his new rivals. At first glance, a wall of propaganda, but in reality, a massive secret investigation. While the public heard rumors, the Soviets launched Operation Myth. This was the most exhaustive forensic investigation in history. Stalin issued the direct order. More than 800 people were interrogated. The NKVD confiscated thousands of documents. They analyzed every bone fragment found in the Chancellery Garden. For 4 years, a specialized team worked in the shadows. It got worse. The result was a 413-page dossier. This document held more information than any Western archive in existence. The file contained photographs of burnt remains and complete interrogation transcripts. It featured detailed dental analyses and a minute-by-minute chronology of the final days in the bunker. It was a masterpiece of intelligence work. The footage shows empty folders and classified stamps. One document stood out among the rest. It was a handwritten note by Stalin himself on the final report. He wrote, "Special archive, not for distribution." The Soviet leader possessed the absolute truth. He simply decided the world was not ready to hear it. He chose silence over facts. But this was only the beginning. Key witnesses faced a brutal fate. Katta Häusermann and Fritz Echtmann were dental assistants. They were the ones who positively identified Hitler's remains using dental records. Their reward was not a thank you. They were arrested and sent to Siberian labor camps. Their crime was not loyalty to the Reich. It was knowing the truth about Hitler's death. The two witnesses remained in captivity for 10 years. It was enough time for their stories to fade. By the time they were released in the 1950s, the world had moved on. The official Soviet narrative of uncertainty had become the global standard. Moscow had successfully rewritten history through isolation. Soviet control over the physical evidence was absolute. They cordoned off the bunker area for years. Western researchers were barred from the site. Every fragment of bone, every personal object, and every scorched document moved to classified facilities in Moscow. The evidence vanished into the basements of the Lubyanka. There was no turning back. The story cut off here. 1955. This was the first time Western officials gained access to the bunker, but they found nothing of value. The site was completely transformed. Workers had repainted every wall. The floors were ripped out and replaced. Every trace of forensic evidence was gone. It was a sterile room. The manipulation went deeper. The Soviets created 3 separate stories. They told Western governments one version. They told the Soviet public another. They gave international media a third. It was a strategy of deliberate contradiction. If no story matched, no single truth could survive. 1968, a Soviet journalist named Lev Bezimensky published a book titled The Death of Adolf Hitler. He claimed to use secret KGB files. The book stated Hitler died by cyanide poisoning. This contradicted every previous eyewitness account of a gunshot to the head. It was a lie. Years later, records proved the Kremlin ordered Bezimensky to write it. The goal was simple: keep the world arguing, keep the truth buried. 1970. Yuri Andropov, the head of the KGB, made a final move. He ordered the destruction of all physical remains. For 25 years, bone and dental fragments sat in secret archives. Agents took them to a forest near the city of Magdeburg. They built a fire. They incinerated the remains until only ash remained. The ashes were thrown into the Biederitz River, a tributary of the Elbe. There was nothing left to test. No DNA, no bone structure, no independent forensic analysis was now possible. The KGB claimed they wanted to prevent a Nazi shrine. In reality, they were erasing the crime scene. The Soviet Union collapsed. Declassified documents finally emerged. They revealed a massive cover-up operation. This was not just about one man's death. This was a pilot program for disinformation. The Soviets had built a template for lying about history. They would use these same techniques throughout the Cold War. The consequences are still visible today. 80 years have passed. We still live with the fallout of Stalin's campaign. Conspiracy theories about Hitler's escape did not start by accident. They were manufactured in Moscow. It was a calculated state operation. Stalin created a mystery to maintain power. He proved that controlling information is as effective as occupying territory. In the video, the confusion is clear. But one question remains. Was there a body double? Who really died in the bunker? The most disturbing possibility has nothing to do with the body itself. The story ends here. April 30th, 1945. The world believed the dictator died in his bunker, but evidence suggests a different reality. What if Hitler never entered the bunker at all? How could a world leader vanish? At first glance, an impossible feat, but in reality, a calculated shell game. During the final months of the war, the Führer deployed a network of body doubles. These men were more than just lookalikes. They were human shields designed to intercept bullets and bombs. Each candidate underwent months of training to master Hitler's specific gestures, his speech patterns, and his gait. They stood on podiums and greeted crowds, while the real dictator stayed underground in secret locations. Two names stand out in the classified files: Gustav Wehler and Heinrich Bergner. They were the most convincing decoys in the Third Reich. Wehler was a professional actor before the war. He possessed a natural talent for mimicry. Bergner was a low-level party official who shared Hitler's height and frame. Records show Bergner underwent minor plastic surgery to sharpen his facial features. The paperwork ends abruptly. Both men vanished from official German records during the final weeks of April 1945. No death certificates exist. Their families received no telegrams. No bodies were ever identified or returned for burial. They simply ceased to exist as the Soviet army approached Berlin. Hitler's physical decline was a matter of public record. By 1945, he was a wreck. He suffered from a visible tremor in his left hand, a hunched back, and a pale, sickly complexion. These were not just symptoms of illness. They were traits a trained actor could easily exaggerate. A double could play the role of a dying man to mask the real Hitler's escape. March 20th, 1945. This was the final confirmed public appearance of the Führer. The footage shows him decorating members of the Hitler Youth. Even this film is suspicious. Modern forensic analysis reveals significant physical anomalies. The camera records a man whose height does not match Hitler's documented measurements. His right-hand movements follow a pattern never seen in hundreds of previous films. Most importantly, the individual avoids the lens. He never shows the left side of his face. That was where the real Hitler carried a permanent scar from the 1923 Munich Putsch. Forensic evidence from the bunker ruins is equally problematic. The dental records and bone fragments provided by the Soviets show massive inconsistencies. The pieces of the puzzle do not fit the official story. Events accelerated as the city burned. While the world watched the bunker, the real targets had already moved. The trail goes cold in the smoke of Berlin. April 1945. Blood samples taken from the sofa in the bunker did not match. Reich medical records were explicit. Adolf Hitler had blood type A. The samples analyzed by Soviet forensic teams were blood type B. This discrepancy appeared in internal NKVD reports. It was never explained to the public. The remains presented a second problem. Internal organs were completely missing. Witnesses described an incomplete cremation in the open air. This process would have left soft tissue fragments behind. Such tissues are necessary for toxicological analysis to confirm the presence of cyanide. No such tissues existed. The remains appeared to be specifically prepared. Every piece of biological evidence that could contradict the official story was gone. It was not a chaotic burning. It was a systematic elimination of proof. At first glance, a definitive identification, but in reality, a biological impossibility. The year was 2009. DNA testing revealed that the skull fragment held in Russian archives belonged to a woman. If the Soviets incorrectly identified a female skull as Hitler, every other identification is now in doubt. This discovery adds weight to the double theory. The presence of female remains suggests a staged scene. Multiple bodies were likely used to simulate a double suicide. Eva Braun did not necessarily die in the bunker. Many young women worked in the chancellery. Many disappeared during the final battle for Berlin. Any one of them could have served as a body double. Events accelerated. The testimonies of the inner circle now take on a different character. Heinz Linge and Otto Gunsche were the men closest to the Führer. They were the only people in a position to tell the difference between the real Hitler and a look-alike. They did not just watch the cremation, they managed the protocol. The footage shows. The witnesses are consistent, almost rehearsed. If a double was used, Linge and Gunsche were not innocent bystanders. They were active participants in a deception. The logistics were complex, the timing was tight, but it was not impossible. The story cut off here. Martin Bormann. In the final years of the Third Reich, he controlled all access to Hitler. He decided who entered the bunker and who stayed outside. This position gave him the power to coordinate a body substitution. What happened to Bormann? His fate is a blank space. A body was discovered in 1972. DNA tests in 1998 confirmed it was his. But the evidence raised more questions. The body was buried with strange care in a specific location. No one can explain how it got there. The cremation of Adolf Hitler provided a window of opportunity. It lasted 3 hours. During this time, a small group of conspirators operated in the smoke. They didn't just burn a body. They managed a high-stakes exchange. The environment was chaotic. The Red Army was closing in. Constant shelling shook the ground. Thick black smoke covered the Chancellery garden. This wasn't just a funeral. It was a tactical screen for clandestine movement. Why did the Soviet reports change? At first glance, a routine autopsy, but in reality, a cover-up. Soviet forensic experts noted anatomical inconsistencies. The records show the remains were too small. The height did not match Hitler's medical files. The bone structure was too light. These facts were documented in preliminary notebooks. Then, the files were purged. Final reports omitted the discrepancies. It was a deliberate intervention to hide the truth. The footage shows nothing. There are no photographs of the body before the fire began. There is no film of the remains. In a regime obsessed with documentation, this silence is a signal. Events accelerated. The physical evidence disappeared into a shallow pit. Only the official version remained. Thus began the mystery. 0 photos, 0 film reels. The Third Reich documented every ideology and ritual with precision. But there's not a single image of the charred remains of Adolf Hitler or Eva Braun. This absence stands out. Witnesses described the cremation as a solemn ceremony attended by high-ranking officers in the bunker garden. In a regime obsessed with visual proof, the camera remained silent. Why was the evidence destroyed so thoroughly? It seemed like a fear of desecration, but the facts suggest a different motive. Hitler's behavior in the final days shifted. He was resigned to death, yet he became obsessed with the mechanics of his own physical erasure. He gave specific orders for the gasoline, the pit, and the fire. He didn't just want to die, he wanted to vanish. This level of concern with the total elimination of evidence aligns more with a staged deception than a simple suicide. Modern science points to dental records. These analyses are often called definitive. But there is a technical gap. Hitler's dental bridges were removable devices. They were not fixed. In theory, these prostheses could be extracted and placed into the mouth of a double after death. Forensic identification based on loose dental work without attached mandibular bone is not absolute proof. It is a lead, but not a final verdict. The trail leads to South America, specifically the Patagonia region of Argentina. This was not a random choice for fugitives. Argentina functioned as an industrial-scale protection machine. It was designed to absorb the leaders of the Third Reich. These were not improvised escape routes. The Ratlines connecting Europe to the Southern Hemisphere were established while the war was still at its peak. The planning started early, 1943. 2 years before the fall of Berlin, Juan Domingo Perón began organizing the arrival of Nazi officials. It was a sophisticated logistics operation. The footage from the era shows the scale of the migration. The church played a central role. Monsignor Krunoslav Draganovic operated from the San Girolamo confraternity in Rome. He was the coordinator. He secured false documents and official Vatican papers for the fleeing officers. The system worked perfectly. The sound of stamping passports echoed through the halls of the church. The operation was massive. It involved thousands of people and millions in assets. No one looked back. The era of the bunker ended, and the era of the shadows began. Paper, ink, and official seals. The fugitives received completely new identities backed by false baptismal records that reached back decades. These were not simple forged passports. They were complete biographies. These files included detailed family histories, education records, and previous employment logs. July 1950. Adolf Eichmann arrived in Argentina. His documents identified him as Ricardo Clement. The papers stated he was a telecommunications technician born in Austria. For 10 years, he lived a quiet life in the suburbs of Buenos Aires. He worked for a German company and raised his children. He did not hide in a basement. Instead, he kept in touch with a network of former Nazis. They met regularly to discuss politics. They shared nostalgia for the Reich. How did the world find out? In 1960, the Mossad captured him. The footage shows a man who had built a second life. He was not a desperate fugitive. He was a man supported by an organization with unlimited resources. Josef Mengele arrived even earlier. The Auschwitz doctor established an even more elaborate existence. He did not just receive Argentine documents. The network provided him with a house and a job in a pharmaceutical company. He gained connections with Buenos Aires high society. For years, he attended social events and opera performances. He sat in academic meetings and spoke with the Argentine intellectual elite. No one suspected his true identity. The scale was massive. It wasn't just survival. It was success. Erich Priebke settled in Bariloche. He became a respected figure in the local German community. For almost 50 years, he lived in the open. He directed a school and led community organizations. He wrote letters to other former Nazis across South America. His case proves a hard fact. These fugitives did not live in terror. They had received guarantees of protection. This allowed them to live productive lives. The infrastructure was impressive. Argentina established immigration offices in major European cities. Specially trained agents worked there. They evaluated candidates for resettlement. The regime prioritized technical value. Engineers, scientists, and administrators moved to the front of the line. There were also specific quotas for political leaders. The Peronist regime wanted their experience in organization and propaganda. How deep did the secrets go? Declassified FBI archives contain hundreds of reports about Adolf Hitler sightings in South America. Many were dismissed as unreliable, but some files contain specific details that demand attention. The case of Philipp Citrin stands out. He was not a person seeking attention. He was a German merchant with verifiable connections in Colombia and Argentina. Citrin provided the CIA with more than just stories. He provided specifics. There was no mistake. The network functioned perfectly. Thus, the fugitives became citizens. October 1955. Philipp Citrin arrived at the American embassy with a list of addresses and names. He claimed to have personally met a man named Adolf Hitler in a German colony near Tuna, Colombia. According to Citron, this man lived on a fortified farm surrounded by armed guards. He received regular visitors arriving in black cars from Argentina. Every day followed the same rhythm: long walks in the morning, reading sessions in German in the afternoon. Citron provided a single photograph. It shows a middle-aged man with a thick mustache sitting on a wooden porch. The image is grainy, but the details are specific. The posture is stiff. The mustache has a sharp rectangular shape. The hands are visible. They are long and thin, showing a distinct scar on the back of the left hand. These were known physical traits of Adolf Hitler. Why didn't this story make headlines? Citron never sought fame. He gave his report to the intelligence officers and vanished. He wrote no memoirs. He sold no interviews. He never asked for a single dollar. Usually, fraudsters want money or attention. Citron wanted neither. He simply delivered the information and walked away. But the story goes deeper than one man's testimony. July 1945. Two German submarines, the U-530 and the U-977, surfaced in Argentina. Officially, they were just surrendering, but the cargo manifests tell a different story. The numbers do not add up. There were massive discrepancies between the declared weight and the actual displacement of the vessels. The U-530 claimed to carry nothing but cigarettes. This was impossible for a ship of its size. Before docking, the captain ordered the destruction of every navigation log and map on board. The U-977 arrived with its crew, but the food stores were overfilled. They had enough provisions to last 6 months at sea. This was not a simple surrender. It was a long-distance transport mission. The destination was the interior of Argentina, specifically the region of Bariloche near Lake Nahuel Huapi. These were not simple houses for refugees, they were fortresses. Hacienda San Ramon is the primary example. The blueprints reveal extraordinary security measures. This was not a private residence. The walls were made of reinforced concrete. Technicians installed advanced radio communication arrays. Underground tunnels connected every building on the property. These structures were designed to withstand an assault. Further west, near the Chilean border, the Alco farm was even more complex. It sat in total isolation. There was no mistake. These sites were built for a specific purpose. They were built for a high-ranking ghost. Thus began the search for a man the world thought was already dead. Access to the property was restricted. Visitors could only arrive by air or through a single narrow mountain path. The estate featured a private landing strip and independent power generators. Construction records show underground bunkers built to survive heavy aerial bombing. These are not features of a vacation home. This was a facility built to hide a high-value target. How could a world-famous dictator vanish in plain sight? Local accounts from the Bariloche region provide a consistent answer. Residents reported seeing an older man who matched Adolf Hitler's physical description throughout the 1950s and 1960s. Catalina Gomero worked as a domestic employee at one of the German-owned farms. She described serving meals to a man who received extreme deference from other German residents. The footage of the era shows the isolation of these estates. Gomero stated the individual never spoke to the local staff. He followed a rigid schedule for every meal. German newspapers arrived for him regularly via diplomatic pouches. But there was a contradiction. Skeptics point out that Hitler was a known vegetarian. Gomero reported serving him meat. There is a medical explanation for this change. Hitler adopted a plant-based diet to manage chronic gastrointestinal pain. An exile in his 60s, lacking specialized doctors, would likely abandon strict dietary rules to survive. Why would the West allow this? The answer lies in the archives. CIA documents contain references to Operation Paperclip South. This mission coordinated the resettlement of German personnel across South America. The files suggest the operation went beyond recruiting scientists for NASA. It included protocols to protect German political leaders. These men were seen as assets in the new war against Soviet communism. The money trail confirms the logistics. Swiss banks handled the finances of the Third Reich. These institutions maintained active links with Argentine banks throughout the 1950s. Digital records show regular fund transfers to specific accounts in Buenos Aires. These payments did not stop. They continued into the 1970s, long after most fugitives were dead or captured. The German community in Argentina was not just a group of immigrants. They maintained a closed social circle. They held private celebrations on Nazi holidays. They funded libraries filled with literature banned in Europe. Their schools taught a revised version of the Second World War. This infrastructure provided more than comfort. It provided operational security. Every neighbor was a lookout. Every school was a shield. The mystery deepens with the final destination. The legends speak of a flight to Antarctica and the construction of Base 211. In 1938, Nazi Germany launched a massive expedition to the ice. Events accelerated. There was no turning back. January 1939. The German ship MS Schwabenland reached the Antarctic coast. Officially, the mission was simple: find a base for whaling. But the reality on board was different. For 3 months, the expedition moved with military precision. 2 Dornier seaplanes launched from the deck every day. They flew over the frozen wasteland, mapping more than 600,000 square kilometers of territory. The pilots dropped metal poles tipped with swastikas every few kilometers. They were staking a claim no other nation would ever recognize. The aerial cameras captured something unexpected. The photos showed massive regions where the ice vanished. Geothermal heat rose from the ground. In these zones, the ice was thin and the water was warm. This created microclimates where humans could survive. For a regime preparing for global conflict, this was not about whales. It was about strategy. It was about a fortress in the ice. Why were the engineers on board? They were not biologists. They were experts in ventilation and underground tunneling. The footage from the era shows these men analyzing soil samples and rock density. They were looking for structural integrity. Captain Alfred Richer commanded the expedition. He kept a private diary. This book remained hidden for decades after the war ended. His secret entries described things the official reports ignored. He wrote about vast underground caverns. He described natural tunnels stretching for kilometers beneath the ice shelf. Richer even noted architectural formations of unknown origin. His orders were clear. He established supply depots at secret coordinates. These locations appeared only on classified maps. The international scientific community saw nothing. The technical reports tell a darker story. Captured archives from 1945 reveal the truth. German engineers studied how to build permanent structures in sub-zero temperatures. They designed underground installations. These bases had to operate independently for years. They planned for massive air filtration systems and geothermal power plants. The legend of Base 211 began here. It was not a myth. It was based on fragments found in the SS Ahnenerbe archives. This was the wing of the SS dedicated to the occult and extreme science. One name appears in the files: Project Ultima Thule. The documents describe a self-sufficient colony. It was a site for laboratories and workshops. The camera pans over the blueprints. They show residential sectors and specialized technology bays. Heinrich Himmler had already formed a specific SS division for this purpose. They were the pioneers of a new frontier. At first glance, a scientific mission, but in reality, a blueprint for a hidden empire. The secret was buried under the ice. It stayed there as the war began. Events in Europe accelerated, but the work in the South did not stop. The plans were ready, the locations were marked. There was no turning back. Thus began the mystery of the Antarctic Reich, 1935. This was the year the Third Reich established a specialized division for polar exploration and anomalous research. Inside the halls of power, they called it the Ahnenerbe Forschungsgruppe. This wasn't a standard military unit. It was a gathering of Germany's most elite physicists, engineers, and occultists. The state provided these men with unlimited resources. They built secret laboratories and filled them with experimental hardware. Their mandate was clear: investigate alternative energy and electromagnetic propulsion. They didn't want better planes. They wanted a new way to move through the air. The goal was complete energy independence. These scientists focused on propulsion systems that could operate without a single drop of fossil fuel. No gasoline, no oil, no traditional combustion. This was the search for a technological breakthrough that would change the nature of physics. 1944. The war reached its final stages. It was during these months that Allied pilots began reporting the Foo Fighters. These sightings were not hallucinations. When viewed through the lens of the Ahnenerbe programs, the glowing orbs take on a different, more mechanical meaning. Allied air crews documented the encounters in official flight logs. The descriptions were consistent across hundreds of reports. Disc-shaped flying objects followed their formations. These crafts exhibited flight capabilities that defied every known law of physics. The footage and logs show impossible maneuvers, instantaneous acceleration from a hovering position, sudden 90-degree direction changes at full speed, velocity that exceeded any aircraft in the Allied or Axis hangars. But where did these reports originate? The most detailed accounts came from the crews of the 415th Night Fighter Squadron. They watched these objects track their movements through the dark. The sound of heavy engines was absent. Only a silent, pulsing light remained. Events accelerated as the front lines collapsed, but the research didn't stop. It just moved underground. Thus began the hunt for the truth behind the German discs.